What happens when the human mind is stretched to its breaking point? Can pain be transformed into brilliance? What if I told you that one of history's most legendary authors had to be shattered before he could rise as a literary titan? Fyodor Dostoevsky, condemned to hard labor in the frozen wastelands of Siberia, discovered in suffering the spark that would ignite his greatest creations. In this video, we'll uncover how prison didn't just influence Dostoevsky's writing, it reshaped him entirely, turning torment into timeless art. When we reflect on Fyodor Dostoevsky, it's clear he stands as one of the most influential writers of all time. But his brilliance wasn't confined to storytelling. He was also a master analyst of the human mind, a fearless voyager into the darkest corners of the soul. His characters capture the full spectrum of human nature, from the depths of depravity to the heights of moral virtue. It's no wonder that Nietzsche once wrote to a friend, calling Dostoevsky's works the richest source of psychological insight I've ever found. In this video, we'll trace the pivotal journey that shaped Dostoevsky's soul and sharpened his pen. We'll examine the moments of suffering that didn't just scar him, they forged him into a peerless student of the human condition. Let's rewind to the year 1849. At 27, Dostoevsky was seen as a promising author who had failed to fulfill the potential of his debut. His novel Poor Folk, released 3 years earlier, had earned him critical acclaim and public attention in Russia's literary world. But his subsequent works were met with indifference or outright criticism. Many believed his literary peak had already passed. What few realized was that this quiet downturn was only the calm before an unprecedented creative storm. In the years that followed, Dostoevsky would pen masterpieces like Crime and Punishment, the brothers Karamazov, The Idiot, and Demons. How did a dismissed and forgotten writer rise to become one of the greatest literary figures of all time? The key lies in a chapter of his life that he would later describe as a descent into earthly hell. The transformation began with his arrest in 1849 for alleged involvement in a group considered radical by the Tsarist regime. Dostoevsky was imprisoned, held for months in solitary confinement, and brought within seconds of death in a staged execution. Standing before the firing squad, believing his life was ending, he was suddenly informed that his sentence had been reduced to years of forced labor in Siberia. The Siberian years were brutal. He lived among hardened criminals, endured freezing conditions and physical hardship, and witnessed firsthand the raw realities of human despair. But it was amid this misery that Dostoevsky discovered the core themes of his future novels: moral conflict, spiritual struggle, and the endurance of the human soul. Rather than breaking him, Siberia transformed Dostoevsky. His suffering became a lens through which he viewed humanity more clearly than most. From agony, he extracted wisdom. From hopelessness, he created beauty. Now join me as we uncover how these defining trials shaped not only Dostoevsky's work, but also his powerful insights into what it means to be human. The 5 years of torment that altered Dostoevsky's life began with what seemed like an innocent decision: his involvement with the Petrashevsky Circle. It was a gathering of intellectuals who met regularly to exchange political and philosophical ideas. An informal salon for discussing the future of Russian society. But in Tsarist Russia, even ideas could be dangerous. The group took its name from its organizer, Mikhail Petrashevsky, and drew in young intellectuals and reform-minded individuals who dreamed of a different Russia, one not bound by rigid conservatism. By 1848, the circle had grown beyond a simple discussion group. It became a space for fiery conversations about progress, personal freedom, and the nation's future. Dostoevsky, however, wasn't among the more outspoken attendees. Naturally introverted and socially uneasy, he tended to listen more than speak. At one point, he admitted, "I am far from talkative, and those who know me are well aware of it. I don't enjoy long speeches, not even with close friends, and even less so in social gatherings where I come across as quiet, even withdrawn." At the time, the Petrushevsky Circle's gatherings weren't illegal, but Europe was undergoing upheaval. Revolutions were breaking out across the continent. This sparked alarm within Russia's ruling class, who feared that revolutionary fervor might seep in and ignite unrest. The Tsarist regime reacted with increased surveillance and tightened restrictions. Eventually, the Circle's activities caught the government's attention. In April 1849, the authorities struck. Dostoevsky was seized in a night raid and transported directly to the Peter and Paul Fortress, a cold, forbidding prison, where he spent 6 months in solitary confinement awaiting judgment. Years later, he would recall that moment with pain. "When I entered the fortress, I thought it was the end. I truly believed I wouldn't survive even 3 days. Yet within those icy walls and suffocating silence, Dostoevsky uncovered a hidden truth about himself and about humanity. He came to understand that within the human spirit lies an untapped reservoir of endurance, a strength that only reveals itself under immense pressure. It's a kind of resilience we often don't know we have until circumstances demand it. And once it surfaces, we discover we're capable of enduring far more than we ever believed." In one letter written during his imprisonment, he shared a revelation only such an ordeal could provide. "My peace of mind depends on me alone. Human beings possess boundless reserves of energy and life. I didn't believe it before, but now I know it from experience." These weren't idle reflections. They came from first-hand suffering. They were the words of someone who had been tested at the deepest level and emerged with renewed insight into his own inner strength. By the close of 1849, the state concluded its investigation into the Petrushevsky Circle. The authorities labeled its members as subversives, radical thinkers with ideals that threatened the Tsar's grip on power. Dostoevsky, along with 14 others, was taken to Semyonovsky Square in St. Petersburg. The sentence was grim and final: execution by firing squad, to be carried out without delay. Picture Dostoevsky then, just 27 years old, healthy, and filled with life, suddenly facing what he believed would be his final moments. Paralyzed by fear yet strangely calm, he leaned toward one of his fellow prisoners and said softly, "We shall be with Christ." The man's reply was dry and sarcastic. An atheist, he pointed to the earth and answered, "A handful of dust." In that moment, Dostoevsky entered what he would later describe as a state of mystical terror. The intensity of this brush with death would stay with him forever, and years later, he would recreate the experience in The Idiot, in a haunting scene where Prince Mishkin tells of a man awaiting execution. That man, fully aware that only 5 minutes of life remained, broke down those final moments into meaningful segments. 2 minutes to bid farewell to his companions, 2 to dive inward and gather his thoughts, and a final minute to gaze upon the world one last time. With remarkable clarity, he focused all his attention on his surroundings. Amid the tension, his eyes landed on the golden domes of a distant church glimmering under the sunlight. That image seemed to whisper something profound, perhaps a promise or a mystery just out of reach. Yet that same radiance was a cruel reminder. In mere seconds, he would be separated from all of it forever. Suspended between what was familiar and what lay beyond, he was caught in a strange mix of dread and awe. This wasn't just a story. Dostoevsky lived it. He was among the second group lined up to be executed. The first three men had already been taken and positioned before the rifles. The end seemed inevitable. But just then, as if fate intervened, a carriage arrived with an imperial decree. The executions were halted. The Tsar had commuted their sentences. Instead of death, Dostoevsky was now condemned to 4 years in a Siberian labor camp. It marked the start of a new ordeal. But more importantly, it offered him something exceedingly rare, a return to life after staring death in the face. That experience would profoundly influence his perspective on existence and shape the voice of his writing. Back in his cell at the Peter and Paul Fortress, Dostoevsky penned an emotional letter to his brother. In it, he poured out the revelations death had forced upon him. When I reflect on how I squandered time, chasing pointless distractions, consumed by pride, apathy, and wasting my potential, I feel deep sorrow. Life is a miracle. Life is joy. Each moment holds the potential for boundless happiness, if only the young could see it. Now that my life is being remade, I feel reborn, as if I've been given a new identity. The momentary relief of being spared was quickly replaced by the cold reality of what awaited. Siberia, 4 years in unforgiving conditions, surrounded by dangerous criminals, tormented by freezing temperatures, barely surviving on scraps, and forced into grueling labor. Life there was brutal, but it revealed something to him. Observing the men around him, he was stunned to see how little the filth, hunger, and pain seemed to affect them. This led to a powerful realization: the astonishing adaptability of the human being. Later, in Notes from a Dead House, he wrote, "Man is a creature who can get used to anything, and that, I think, is the best definition of him." Yet perhaps the most unexpected and suffocating hardship of prison wasn't physical, it was psychological, the complete absence of solitude. For years he lived every second in the presence of others, either fellow inmates or the eyes of guards. This relentless exposure made him cherish what so many free people overlook: the gift of silence and the need for solitude. He later wrote, "I could never have imagined how exhausting it would be to go years without a single moment alone." Being constantly surrounded didn't mean he felt connected. In fact, those 4 years were a period of profound inner isolation. Even in the middle of a crowd, Dostoevsky remained spiritually alone. That loneliness was overwhelming at first, but eventually it became a space for introspection and personal transformation. In his words, "Throughout all that time, even though I was constantly surrounded by people, I experienced a deep and painful isolation. Over time, I grew to appreciate that solitude. It became a space for intense introspection. I revisited my entire past, dissecting every decision with brutal honesty. I held myself accountable, and in certain moments I even felt grateful to fate for forcing me into that reflection. Without that silence, I would never have confronted my errors so thoroughly. It was in those long, quiet hours that I began to sketch the path I wanted for my life. A quiet but powerful conviction took hold of me. I would persevere. I longed for the day of my release, determined to rise again and prove what I was capable of." The prison served not only as a space of reflection, it also became a laboratory for understanding the extremes of human behavior. Dostoevsky was not only immersed among hardened criminals, but also carefully observed the camp's guards. There he came to recognize something frightening: the corrupting nature of unchecked authority. He saw ordinary men, who seemed decent at first, slowly morph into ruthless tyrants, consumed by the power they wielded over others. In Notes from a Dead House, he warned, "Despotism isn't merely an act. It's a deeply ingrained habit, one that spreads like a disease." He wrote, "When a person gains absolute control over another human being, over their body, their mind, and their soul, and uses that control to degrade and humiliate without restraint, he begins to lose himself. The tyranny takes over like a sickness. The longer it persists, the harder it is to reverse." This insight serves as a warning about the seductive danger of authority. It also stands as proof that life's most harrowing trials can teach us invaluable lessons, if we dare to confront our own darkness and seek truth, even amid despair. Let me emphasize one essential point. Even the kindest of men, when repeatedly exposed to cycles of domination and violence, can become numb, indifferent, even cruel. Constant proximity to power corrodes the spirit. Slowly, things that once shocked become routine. Acts that once repelled can begin to allure. Such a man drifts from his humanity, and the citizen he once was begins to vanish, replaced by something unrecognizable. For the one consumed by tyranny, the return to human dignity is a nearly impossible journey, like trying to escape from a maze with no exit. Yet not all is bleak in the human soul. Paradoxically, it was within the prison walls that Dostoevsky caught his first glimpse of humanity's limitless potential for goodness. At first, he entered prison wearing the armor of superiority. As a well-read man from noble roots, he regarded the other inmates with scorn. He saw only criminals, unworthy of respect or sympathy. What could these rough, uneducated men possibly teach him? But gradually that arrogance began to crack. He began to see something unexpected beneath their rugged exteriors, a quiet nobility, a moral resilience that defied everything he had assumed. It was as though life itself had taught these men a wisdom no book ever could, a depth of character born from suffering, not schooling. Dostoevsky later wrote about how these revelations shook him. He admitted that, after years of living beside someone he had dismissed as little more than an animal, the man would, without warning, reveal a moment of profound emotion, a surge of sincerity that laid bare a soul full of feeling. It stunned him and shattered his judgments. In those rare moments, Dostoevsky witnessed a depth of humanity so raw and authentic, a sensitivity toward pain, both personal and shared, that it felt like his vision had been reborn. Suddenly everything clicked. The true nature of a person may be hidden beneath rough layers, but it never disappears entirely. His time in the prison camp gave Dostoevsky a deep, first-hand understanding of a universal human need, the search for meaning. This wasn't something he concluded in the comfort of theory. It was something he learned by closely observing the lives of the men he lived beside. He noticed that almost every prisoner found small ways to occupy themselves, often secretly and despite the rules. Whether it was crafting something, humming a tune, or playing simple games, these private rituals gave them something to hold on to. Interestingly, even the guards allowed it to happen, knowing that completely removing those distractions could lead to unrest. This taught Dostoevsky something powerful. When a person is stripped of purpose, psychological breakdown is almost inevitable. From this, he developed one of the most haunting ideas in his body of work, that the surest way to destroy a person mentally is to force them to engage in tasks that are entirely void of meaning. Things like endlessly shifting rocks back and forth for no reason. In Notes from a Dead House, he captured the horror of such empty labor. Picture a man ordered to pour water from one barrel into another, again and again, or to move a mound of dirt from one spot to another and then back again. That is torment worse than death, an agony that crushes the soul, breaks the spirit, and erases hope. Years later, this insight became more than just philosophical musing, it became a terrifying reality. In Nazi concentration camps, prisoners were subjected to precisely the kind of senseless labor Dostoevsky had described decades earlier. In one account, Holocaust survivor Eugen Heller recalled being forced to carry sand from one end of a destroyed factory to the other, and then back again with no explanation. He said, "At first we thought it was an error, but then we understood it was deliberate. Every day we performed this pointless routine, and slowly something inside us began to break. People started to lose their minds." This chilling testimony reflects a core truth. Meaning is what anchors our sanity and preserves our humanity. Strip it away, and we begin to unravel. Dostoevsky, even during his own imprisonment, seemed to understand this more clearly than most. He saw that prisoners assigned to real work, however harsh or forced, could still endure because there was a perceived utility in it. But when the work became completely meaningless, many simply couldn't hold on. Some tried to flee, only to be gunned down. Others deliberately ran toward the barbed wire fence, knowing it was electrified, seeking death over further despair. What all this revealed to Dostoevsky was something critical, that hope and purpose are not just comforts. They are the foundation of mental stability, especially during prolonged suffering. He noticed that those who managed to hold on to a dream, a belief in something better to come, withstood the hardship with greater strength. But when that hope was extinguished completely, collapse wasn't far behind. Without hope, many spiraled into madness or gave up altogether. One of Dostoevsky's fellow inmates, overwhelmed by total despair, chose to attack a prison official. His intent wasn't revenge, it was to die. For him, a violent end felt more bearable than continuing a life drained of all hope. Another man, gripped by obsession, spent days absorbed in reading the Bible before suddenly assaulting a senior officer with a brick. These acts weren't random violence. They were the desperate expressions of men so lost in hopelessness that they sought a kind of forced martyrdom, anything to escape the unbearable weight of existence. The harsh truth is that humans cannot survive long without something to strive toward. Without a goal or a reason to endure, despair takes root, eroding the soul and reducing a person to a shell driven by desperation. The years between 1849 and 1854 were especially grueling for Dostoevsky, but they taught him critical lessons about human vulnerability, particularly the delicate nature of the mind. Throughout his life, he battled severe psychological turmoil. He suffered from crippling social anxiety. On one occasion, he lost consciousness simply after being introduced to an attractive woman at a social gathering. He was also a hypochondriac, plagued by a relentless fear of being buried alive. So intense was this fear that he left written instructions in his home requesting that if he were ever found seemingly dead, those around him should wait several days before confirming his burial. These personal torments, while deeply distressing, gave shape to Dostoevsky's philosophical and emotional insight. They not only helped him endure the darkest chapters of his life, but also allowed him to articulate, with remarkable clarity, the interplay between suffering, purpose, and human strength. There was a period when he lived under the constant grip of panic, as though an unseen force followed him everywhere. Just before his life took another drastic turn, he confided in a friend about the mental storm raging inside him. Wrestling with both creative pressure and inner chaos, he found it nearly impossible to express the full depth of his unease. "It's impossible to put into words," he admitted, "but I was overwhelmed. Again and again I felt on the edge of something inevitable, like a shadow was always near me, then suddenly gone, leaving behind nothing but emptiness." Yet following his survival of the mock execution and brutal years of imprisonment, Dostoevsky wrote a letter to his brother that showed just how profoundly he had changed. Reflecting on 5 years of brutal trials, he made a surprising confession. In enduring so much pain, something inside him had healed. "If you imagine I still carry the old fears and anxieties, know this: I'm no longer that man," he stated with certainty. The fears that once ruled him had faded like mist under sunlight. What did he discover in those harrowing years? That even the worst suffering holds the power to reshape a person from the inside out. The prison sentence, the loneliness, the trauma of facing a firing squad, the back-breaking labor, none of it broke him. Instead, these trials became crucibles through which he was transformed. Dostoevsky came to believe that the soul is forged in struggle, and that while comfort may dull the spirit, adversity awakens it. Hardship, he realized, forces a person to confront their limits, and in doing so, they often uncover a hidden strength they never thought they possessed. Had it not been for those 5 years of suffering, Dostoevsky might never have become the literary giant we remember today. Perhaps he would have remained a writer haunted by inner turmoil, limited by his emotional struggles and creative blocks. But through pain, he uncovered a profound depth that few ever reach. In Crime and Punishment, he wrote, "Suffering and pain are unavoidable for someone with a wide consciousness and a heart that feels deeply. I believe that truly remarkable individuals must endure great sorrow during their lives." These weren't simply poetic words. They were drawn from his own lived experience. For Dostoevsky, suffering was a crucible, not a curse. It refined his soul, stripped away illusions, and forged wisdom from chaos. That's where the real message lies. Life, with all its storms, can shape us into something stronger, something rare. And if you're still here reading this, it means his story struck a chord with you. And that means a lot to me, because this isn't just about Dostoevsky. In many ways, it's about you. It's about us. Who hasn't known what it feels like to be at the edge of collapse? Who hasn't had moments where life demanded more than they thought they had to give? And yet, you're here. That alone says something powerful. You're someone who seeks understanding, who's willing to look deeper than the surface. Dostoevsky's journey reminds me of a quiet truth. Even when everything seems dark, there's a light that only those who've suffered can recognize. Maybe that's what brings us together in this space. The search for meaning, for something real amidst all the noise. If I could reach through this screen, I'd thank you personally for taking this time, for sharing this reflection. Thank you for walking through these thoughts, through time and memory, and maybe in the process, through a part of yourself too. Because what Dostoevsky teaches us is that while suffering may be inevitable, growth is always a choice. And today you chose to grow. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you with one simple invitation. If this touched you, pass it on. Share it with someone who might also be walking their own path in the dark. And if you want to keep exploring stories like this, consider subscribing so we can keep traveling together. Never forget, life, even when heavy, is still a miracle. Every second has the potential to reveal something infinite. Thank you for spending a few of yours with me today. And if you're curious to learn how other great minds transform adversity into insight, or want to keep exploring the mysteries of our human nature, I've picked out two more stories just for you. Click and let's keep going. I'll be there waiting.